Good morning, mate. How are you? Welcome to a beautiful Friday morning. Check this shit out. Come on, man. How good's that? For early March, that's as good as it gets. Welcome to the end of the week. I hope the week has been good for you. I hope it's been enjoyable. At the end of the working week, do you feel satisfied? Or do you have regrets? That's a very convenient question, Anthony, because today I would like to talk about the concept of regret. I'm a 33-year-old guy. I've got lots of regrets. How could you not have any regrets? Judging by a perfect technical standard, I guess you could argue theoretically that if I had zero regrets in life, by now I would be retired, I would be loaded, I'd be absolutely jacked. I'm talking comical levels of yoked, can't fit through door frames. Doctors are concerned about me, yet my testosterone levels would be so high that it wouldn't even concern me. It would just be like through one ear out the other. Perhaps I'd live on a private island in Thailand. Clearly that's not the case. I'm standing here in a park in London, about to start my 9-to-5 job on this Friday morning. So by that impossible standard, I do have regrets. But that's an absurd thing to say, and I think in that reveals the absurdity of the entire concept of regret. So today, I'd like to break down my working thoughts on the idea of regret that I have accumulated over all 33 years of my life so far, but probably had better clarity on in the last year or so. So let me clumsily try and talk about that today. I'm back home now, by the way, in case that wasn't clear. I'm no longer in the park. So in this video, I would like to try and dismantle the concept of regret, because we can all accept as a base premise that we all live with some degree of regret. We can assume we all have it, so what do we do about it? The first point to make is the really obvious one, which is that regret is us stewing about something that has happened in the past. We live in the present, therefore we can't do absolutely shit about it, so we should let it go. Really obvious to understand on paper, not so easy clearly to implement in practice. Like, it's pretty fair to say as adults, we all theoretically know that holding on to regret is a bad thing. It's like we've heard corny self-help sayings before, like the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. And we're like, yeah, I get it. But that doesn't really help the fact that I'm still feeling regret at all. Nobody wants to talk about regret because regret is an unpleasant thing to experience. And so when faced with the possibility of confronting that emotion, we would all rather run away. Ironically, that is the very cycle of behavior, the avoidance of the emotion of regret, that leads us to more life of regret. Because in not confronting it in that moment, that just allows the passage of more time, which to a later point is going to be another basis for us to have regret. As long as we are avoiding the negative emotion of regret, we probably can't begin to put in place actions that would potentially change the scenario itself so that we no longer regret it at all, or at least accept that what's happened in the past has already happened and we can move forward in a more positive way. And so I think that the first step for all of us has to be accepting and confronting the emotion of regret, sorting out what it is that it actually is, labeling it, giving it a name, but then recognizing that once that's done, it's contained in its box. It's in the past, it can't be done anything about, and we're able to finally move forward. But in beginning to get our sense of time and perspective on this matter, I think that leads us to the second point here, which is that if we are constrained by regret, if regret has a stranglehold on our lives, if we are wondering what we can do about our regret, I think that in itself is asking the wrong question. The entire concept of regret supposes that we exist in the present day as the all-knowing, objective arbiter of truth. And when we look back on our poor, corrupted, inferior self, that was a person who should have known better, because us in the present moment, we know everything that's on the table. We know everything that happened since the past. We have more experience, we have more perspective. And so what we are doing really is sitting up on a perch, looking back at our former corrupted selves and wagging our finger that we should have known better. The trick that we play on ourselves of having this perspective is to think that our memories, that our entire conception of what happened in the past is a very fixed, objective thing. But unfortunately, we are very biased, selective individuals. We retain memories in the past where we like to focus on negative things that we've done that we could have done better. We reflect probably in a biased way on positive emotions in the past and maybe try and neglect, avoid, or sweep under the rug negative experiences about things that we now choose to miss somehow. It's never a perfect measurement. And so sitting where we are now today and trying to amplify all the reasons in our past of why we didn't do that thing that now today we are wishing we did is a completely unfair game to play on ourselves. It's a game that we can never win. We are constantly in the present moment thinking about our previous selves and how they weren't as knowledgeable or as proficient or as everything good that we are now. It's completely unfair, and ultimately it's us beating up on the previous versions of ourselves, which one is self-destructive, but two, and perhaps more importantly, it's beating up on someone who is defenseless. We don't get to go back in time and stand up for ourselves as the previous version. It is just a one-way finger-wagging exercise of us in the present day saying how bad and incompetent previous us was. And I think it's pretty clear to see that that's not a very healthy relationship to create with ourselves, and it's not something that we want to be able to hold on to for the decades to come in our lives. And so, of course, while I'm not saying that we shouldn't be sitting where we are today and learning from past mistakes, that we shouldn't perhaps be upset for a moment in ourselves on why we didn't make better decisions. I'm not saying that that's a process that shouldn't always be happening. But being a bit more humble and understanding our limits in our human capacity allows us to not completely beat up on the defenseless previous versions of ourselves. It allows us to say, perhaps gently, yes, there were things that we could have done better. Perhaps even at the time, we should have known better. But if we're really going to sit here and beat up mercilessly on something that's already in the past as established in point one, but two, something that we're probably not remembering totally right in the first place, well, that's not a really fair assessment to make. And so we should continue to move on. And that takes us to the third point. The third and final point is that you didn't do what you wish now you did then because you didn't then know what you know now. I feel like I've jumbled those words up, but hopefully you get the point. As an exercise, I would really encourage you whenever you're falling into a cycle or a hold or a paralyzing grip of regret, as I tend to still do, but I think way less nowadays than I used to. I would really encourage you that at the point in time in which you are regretting that previous version of yourself and their actions and their decisions and their corrupted ways, is to try and pause and really think what your life was back then when you made that decision or lack of decision. I used to beat up on myself all the time for me in my 20s for doing certain things or not doing certain things. I could list a million regrets related to education decisions, career decisions, romantic decisions, not picking up certain hobbies, not starting things sooner, starting things too late, spending too much time doing X, Y, and Z, not doing enough time doing X, Y, and Z. And all of those things may be fair enough observations, at least in the context of you judging it nowadays. And so the joke is that every time in our lives that we really are fair on ourselves and think what our lives were like, say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when we were supposedly meant to be making these perfect decisions that now we wish we had, the more we think about it, the more we laugh at ourselves, because we think that guy back then didn't really know anything. He didn't know shit. And that, of course, should give some relief in itself. But to take it one step further is to pause for a second and think, what will your life be like in 5 to 10 years' time, 20 years' time, 30 years' time? Inevitably, every time that you do this exercise for the rest of your days, with enough time passing, you will, if you are being fair on yourself, look back on previous you and laugh. You will want to pat yourself on the head and say, oh, that version of me didn't know shit about anything. And so we know that this is the case because every time that we look back on the past in our lives, we have this belief. And so it's fair to say that as time goes on, we will continue to do that. This reveals the fact that we need to be humble. The more we realize that it's like a never-ending thread-pulling exercise. We are constantly the person in the present beating up unnecessarily on what's happened in the past. So long as we think in that way, we can never live in peace because we are constantly fighting against the reality of our experience, which is that there is no past, so to speak. There can only be our reconciliation with the present. Perhaps then, regret isn't a life sentence to be stuck in misery and shame and guilt. The onset of regret can be a cue to us that we have developed perspective and self-awareness of things that perhaps we did not have in our past. And in that sense, regret can be a call to action, not a call to sulk. You are the person that 5 years ago you wish you were then. You are the person now with relative experience, developed capabilities, perspective, and self-awareness that back then you thought you did, but on reflection, you did not. And so in the fact that we can't go back in time, in the fact that we can't control what happens in the future, but at some point in time in the past, you wished that you had the perspective that you did today, and at some time in the future, you look back on the past and think, why didn't I make better decisions back then? You are exactly where you need to be. With that perspective of the present moment, you can be the beneficiary of regret, not the absolute cuck of it. Don't be a regret cuck. That seems like a good place to wrap up. I hope that was useful to you, mate. Yeah, it's Friday afternoon. I'll tell you something I don't regret ever. It's going to the pub on a Friday afternoon for a beer with your mates. And that's where I'm going to soon. Have a nice weekend. See you tomorrow. Cheers.